We are live.
Fantastic, and thank you, Martha. And today is our 35th Hash Sales EU topic. And today we're going to be discussing effective social media analysis for sales. Now, there's been a lot of talk around social media with sales. As we say in England, it's a bit like Marmite. You either love it or you hate it. And it's one of those topics where salespeople tend to be either on board and they'll do it quite well, or they just don't get it whatsoever. Despite the evidence, there are some people out there who still don't quite get it. And I think that's probably one of the things that we need to talk about in the list of many questions we have today. And our expert for today is the Josh McCormack. Josh, welcome.
Thank you very much.
So your background is you've been a developer. So you're a techie at heart, would I say, and then a project manager. Cool.
Yes, and
followed by an entrepreneur.
Yes, for the last 8 years or so, I've run my own web development company where I've managed to take those interests in development and project management and lead them into client relations and things like that. So in a lot of instances, we're finding pain points like this, like analysis, and helping people to integrate them where they really should be.
You know, I think that's fantastic, particularly when you get somebody who's from a technical orientation who goes into a business development type of role, because they come into it with fresh eyes and they come into it with an analytical mind as well, whereas somebody who started off in sales and have done sales all their life don't always have that analytical approach. There's strengths and minuses to both, but it could be because I'm from a technical background as well. I like the analytical approach because I like to see the whole, the way it works, the thought process behind it, and the numbers to back it up as well. So I think having yourself on is great because hopefully we're going to hear some good stats from you as well.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah. So tell me a bit about yourself. How can people get in contact with you? What's your Twitter handle? What's your website? Where do you blog?
My Twitter handle is @JoshMcCormack, which I think I see popping up on Twitter now in this discussion. You can email me at josh@interactiveqa.com. I blog at joshmccormack.com. And normally we have a corporate site, but there were some problems with the host, so the carpenter's child has no shoes presently, but that will be rectified shortly. Clients have priority, so I don't feel embarrassed about not having a site.
Absolutely. It's one of those things, isn't it? Is where you tend to work in your own house last, effectively.
Yes. Yeah, always be suspicious of a web development company that has a really great site. That's what I say.
Yeah, too much time on the hands. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so that's how to get a hold of you. That's great to get that information out there, so that's good. What we're going to do next is we're going to dive into the questions. So the first one is fairly easy to get us up and running. Why is social media analysis needed for sales? So this is specifically the analysis part.
Sure. Without social media analysis, you're really stabbing in the dark. You're basing your decisions and how you're spending your time and investing your resources on assumptions, and you really need some data analysis to aggregate all of that data that's out there and give you some insight into how you should be spending your time.
So how do we start with that? So somebody who's not done this sort of analysis now. My background is artificial intelligence and database technologies, going on through evolutionary prototyping. So I've done a lot of analysis work in my background. So I know how to start these things. But a lot of people, particularly if you're talking about small businesses, don't know the first steps. So let's go from the top 3 items. Where exactly do you start from a practical point of view?
Well, maybe the first thing to consider is where not to start. There are a lot of vanity metrics out there that are very tempting to follow. Things like likes and followers and things like that may not really be that relevant. It's not how many people you've connected with, or even how many people have gotten your message. It's how many of the right people have received your message and are interested in it and want to discuss with you further. So once you've clarified what things to look at and what not to, you can look at the particular platforms for analytical information, or you can work with one of the tools that are out there that aggregate this data and will try to generate reports for you. You just have to be careful that you're not getting a really restrictive view and you're ignoring some important information. I mean,
Yeah.
certainly, if nowhere else, you can start out with Google Analytics. That's always a good place to start, because then you can see how people are coming to you, what blog posts you're writing, are people actually reading and reacting to? So it's always a good place to start.
Yeah, I'd have to say Google Analytics is, having used other tools as well, I think that's a great place to start. And in many ways, it's better than some of the paid-for tools that you can get out there as well. Or at least that's my experience. And the fact it's free is fantastic. Oh, should I say free currently is fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah,
Are there any other
definitely.
tools that you like to use? Because I think it's important to be able to see the tracking, so how people come through, which obviously Google Analytics does, but then the step-by-step approach, because there are some visual tools you can get, etc., to show you where people are looking. Have you used any of
Yes.
those? How do they work?
Yeah, and increasingly, I think as we syndicate our content, we don't necessarily have all of our things on our own blog or our own corporate site. Maybe we're pushing things out through LinkedIn or Medium, or guest blogging somewhere, or just microblogging, as they call it, on Twitter or Instagram or elsewhere.
Yeah,
It's important to get a view outside your own house to see what's happening with your brand and your content. And the product that I've seen that's done the most impressive job of that is Nuvi. I think that just is
okay.
is a dazzling view of your brand, your competition, what's going on in real time, and you can generate reports really easily.
That's a good. Okay, so that's a good thing to go and look at to begin with. So what would you look at? So obviously there's a number of amount of reading that's taking place of your blog, so you can then align that with what your audience is interested in.
Yes.
How do you begin to use the analytics to identify what your audience actually is? And how does that translate into the sales element? Because, of course, that audience needs to be somebody I can sell to as well.
Sure. Well, I think before even investing a tremendous amount of time in writing a whole series of pieces on something, you could sort of dip your toe in the water, test the market, see what people are interested in by posting to Twitter, posting to LinkedIn, Instagram, Pinterest, all these different places with things on the topics that you're considering, and gauge the interest by looking at the analytics that you can get there. You can see, you can look at Twitter analytics, and you could see what was your impressions, your engagement, the retweets, things like that. So there might be some topic that you're convinced will be the most interesting thing in the world, but no one will be interested at all. And I think
Absolutely.
that's important to know.
Yeah, it is, and I think that actually, if you think about from the analytical point of view, simply changing some of the terminology or keywords to make it easier for people to find has a huge impact on your readership, effectively. So
Yes.
that's that initial homework, as I would discuss it, or say, I think is critical to anybody, particularly when you're first starting out in business, because it's so easy to go down the wrong road.
Oh, yes, definitely. That's one of the tricky things, too, I think, for small businesses particularly, or for salespeople who are trying to do this on their own. They don't necessarily have organizational support. Is it can require data analysis can require a lot of expertise and a lot of time, and
Yeah.
you probably don't have those things in excess. So it's ideal to find easy ways to gather this data together and get some insight from it, which can be tricky.
Okay. So as you mentioned, the word insight, that's obviously a buzz term at the moment. How do we find or generate topics which will give insights to our customers? Particularly in the sales arena, we talk about insight selling, which is, of course, just being able to give nuggets of information to people which hold truths in them, which are fantastic because people can then apply them. How do you discover these insights?
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I think if you find where your potential market is congregating and listen to them, see what their needs are, and what topics are really gaining a lot of traction, jump in, add some value, add some of your own thoughts, and see what the reactions are, and monitor where that goes. See if influencers pick up on what you're saying. See if decision makers are interested, and base your opinions on those things. So find where your audience is first before you try to talk to them.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's also don't always just go with the crowd. I think it's important to, particularly if you want to be known as a thought leader in your market space, to encourage debate within the marketplace about a particular topic, so that then everybody can gain a clear understanding about what's being discussed and the different approaches to it. Because it's never going to be one size fits all. So sometimes coming up with a controversial view can also gain that interest and, of course, web traffic effectively, isn't it?
Sure, and I think in that instance, I think it's important to have some humility. I think we all caution people against claiming that you're a guru, a ninja, a maven, all these sort of things. But oftentimes there are more than one correct answer. There's more than one correct answer, and nothing will make people want to flee from you quicker than telling people that you have the absolute truth and they're absolutely wrong. And there are only a few things in life that really have absolute answers to them, I'd say.
Yes, yeah, no, I think that would be, yeah. Although we like to try and treat this as a science almost, it's simply not that scientific, because you are dealing with humans and their interactions and how they relate to each other. So it's very emotional.
Yeah.
Although the data does support the cohorts that you can break people into.
Yes.
So as we're talking about it, what about the return on investment? So question 2. Is there a return on investment possible with social selling? Now, this gets asked in probably every interview we do for social selling, so it's no different for yourself, I'm afraid. You need to answer that question.
I think there's arguably return on investment with just about everything. Maybe not in a quarterly timeline, maybe not per interaction, but certainly if you say if you're starting out now and up to this point you've just been participating in social media, but you haven't really been using data to guide you. If you measure where you are now and then start measuring your results and see where data analysis leads you, I think you should see a change. You should see an improvement, and that's certainly where you'd get your ROI from.
Yeah, absolutely. And there have been some good studies done which have shown return on investment. So IBM have famously turned around and said they had a 400% increase or ROI effectively with their social selling pilot that they set up, which it's IBM. They obviously did it right. And I think that's probably one of the crucial elements is how you approach this and how you did it. Because I do see many salespeople playing lip service to it, or they've been given poor guidance, so it's difficult to turn around and then justify it after the event, because they're simply broadcasting only rather than interacting and engaging. And if they did that on the phone, it would never work. They'd never do it on the phone.
No, yeah, that's absolutely crucial. I would argue you would be better off never blogging and only interacting with people online in LinkedIn groups, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever else, really getting some engagement than just producing content, however valuable it might be. I mean, just like you said, if you were calling somebody, or if you were at a networking event and you just walked up to somebody and didn't even introduce yourself and just handed them a stack of reports, I don't think anyone would ever talk to you. You have to listen to people and reply to what their needs are and add value there. So for every piece of content that you're making, think of particular people that actually need that content.
Absolutely. Targeted content, so it becomes relevant to the person it's directed to. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
I think that's so critical. I find it amusing because, of course, the people who are against social sales are often good salespeople in their own right, and when they turn around and talk about sales process and practice, they'll talk about things such as spin selling. Neil Rackham's spin selling from, I think it was published in the late 80s. I've got the book somewhere, but I'll have to check afterwards now, because it'll be on my mind otherwise. And that is all about positioning questions so that you can extract information from a customer or prospect so that you can engage with them. And how you can expect it to be different just because you're using a different type of technology, I don't understand. But they do.
It's It really is it's all about knowing what people need and trying to help them with that. It's maybe people are resistant to the term social selling.
Yes,
It's nothing novel. It's just done in a different way, and I think the key point that makes social selling what it is that statistic that you hear thrown around quite a bit, that it used to be that salesmen were the gatekeepers to information. They had all this information that no one else had, and now
absolutely.
when you engage with a potential customer, they've already done somewhere between 60 and 90% of their research. So they've just about made their decision already. So it's, how have you provided the information? How have you heard their needs or other people's similar needs and engaged with them so that people could find this necessary information to make their decision? And then you're in the right place at the right time to help them through that final little step.
Absolutely. I think you can either be passive about it, and you can say, if the buyer's going to be 50 to 70, depending on who you're reading, percent of the way through their journey, then I should only engage at that final 30%. And I think the difficulty then is you're leaving it so late in the game, you have very little influence over what's going to happen. And if
Yes.
you want to be an order taker, fantastic. Personally, that's not my bag. So in which
Yeah.
case, I'm going to try and get my engagement before the 70%. And 89%, because I did look at the statistics, and it'll be coming out in a tweet very shortly, of all business-to-business buying decisions start with an internet search.
Wow, 89%.
That's right.
That
So
is
that's
tremendous.
phenomenal. Yeah, exactly. But if you think about it, what do? Most of the time, if I need to know something, I turn around, I go to my friend, the fountain of all knowledge, Google,
Yeah,
and
but
I
I
ask
think
that.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting you said B2B. I mean, it's not super surprising, I guess, to think of that in the consumer space, where people would look up reviews, Yelp and Google reviews and things like that. But B2B decisions, that is very interesting.
Yes, I think that comes from because of course you've still got to do the research. When I look at the CRM world, most people are going to things like GetApp, GT Crowd, etc. They're looking for those online reviews as well, and it doesn't matter about the size of the organization. Or they're looking for things such as I recently sold a deal where the chap was looking for implementing challenger sales into his organization as a methodology, and he did a Google search for challenger sales and how to implement it within CRM. And I'd written a blog post about challenger sales and how it related. And he picked up on the blog and contacted me via LinkedIn, which was fantastic and showed, for me, it shows the return on investment I've picked up this lead. But the key
Definitely.
element is he started that. This is a large, hundreds of millions of dollar company. It's a very large gas provider. He Googled. He did a search. He did an internet search to begin with for challenger sales and CRM.
Well, the same as a small business might do.
But of course, he's the line manager, or he's been told by his director go off and do this, and he has to do the research. How does he do that research?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, there are only so many ways to do it these days.
Yes, definitely. And
So of
in an
course,
environment where you want to seem like the expert, maybe you don't want to ask somebody because that will show that you don't know this.
mm,
Searching on the internet is as close to anonymity as you're going to get.
absolutely, and I think probably Rachel Miller will be able to back me up on this. If you look at the new millennials coming through into the workspace, they tend to search first and ask questions second.
Mm, yes.
So the entire way in which people approach research has fundamentally changed in that case. So it's very much digital first, interact personal second.
That's crucial to know.
Mm. So how can we measure social media and how it's being effective?
Well, again, you have to get the data. So the data is out there. Um, It's just a question of collecting it and looking at it in an appropriate fashion, which there are, I've seen some blog posts guiding people through those steps. It can be tricky and it's going to require some serious Excel knowledge, but you could pull data from Twitter, from Instagram, from a bunch of other places, and aggregate it and analyze it. or you can use a commercial tool that will help you with that, which I would lean toward, because without serious data analysis expertise, and you're going to be spending a gigantic amount of time trying to get insights. I think it could be very tricky. Like even just I was looking at some data about my Twitter activity over the last month and trying to find the correlation between retweets, impressions, and engagement. And
Okay.
you don't see very clear, immediate signs that, oh, the number of retweets amplifies my my impressions or my engagement by this much. There are other factors that are involved, presumably who is retweeting, what time of day, what hashtags were involved. So there are a lot of factors that can go into the effectiveness of your message.
Absolutely. I think Social Bros does quite a good job of the free analysis to begin with about what are the best times of day to post. Hootsuite, I think, does that some for you as well, and Buffer App's quite good at that as well.
Yeah, particularly if you're analyzing things that you've posted.
Yeah.
Now, the problem that you can get into is you have to be careful that you're not just analyzing a subset of data that's out there, whether that be just things that you've posted or channel-specific things, because then you might only be getting a view of your little land and not the world beyond it, which seems appropriate for this this cross-continent conversation we're having.
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess that is the issue. We tend to analyze what the results are for us, but you need to look at the bigger picture and find out worldwide what's happening so that you can see essentially what we're talking about is the amount of mind share we've got for that particular topic.
Yes. Yeah, and you have to do competitive analysis. You have to really know who your influencers are, the sentiment. I mean, there's a lot to look into. Not all engagement is good engagement. You don't want
Absolutely.
there to be super active discussions about what a horrible product you're offering.
No, and I think it's one of those things where ultimately it's all got to be driven by the results. And if we're talking about sales, then the results are revenue. And it's that
Absolutely.
straightforward for most salespeople. And I think that's why social selling in particular is such a dirty word with salespeople, is because we've always been told social selling isn't about selling. Well, if I'm in sales, that is what it's about.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the method of getting there is different, yes, and it's about helping people, but ultimately it's about the revenue.
Well, I think social selling breaks down those silos between sales, marketing, and customer service.
Yeah, it does very
And
much.
and it really highlights that sales are or is, depending on where you learned English, is the lifeblood is the lifeblood of an organization. My father was a salesman, and I grew up thinking I never want to be in sales because I saw, sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. And as I grew up, I learned you can't really avoid sales. Everyone either is in sales or serving sales. That's what an organization does, is it sells.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think throughout life, whether you're in sales or not, you are selling to other individuals because it's all about persuasion and influence that you have over people. Whether you're a child in the playground and you want to play with your best friend and get him to play with you, or whether you're an adult who's going for a job, so there's the interview where you're selling yourself, or if you do, as I recently did, I got married, and I had to persuade my wife that I was a good choice.
And did you do that through lots of blog posts?
No, I had to speak to her directly, so
Oh, okay. There was some engagement. We'll have to check
that's right.
the
Yeah, there's a
yeah.
short period of engagement followed by marriage. Yeah, that's right.
That's the sale.
That's right.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Let's move on to question two. Sorry, question four, should we say? What data
Sorry,
should be
we're only
measured?
at question two.
That's right. Question
Sorry.
four. What data should be measured and why?
Well, again, this points back to what to avoid, the vanity metrics. Like, while they might have some tangential importance, don't focus excessively on followers, likes, things like that. The data you should follow: impressions, engagement, retweets for Twitter. But again, yeah, I know reach is a very popular metric. You have to be a little
Yeah.
bit careful about that because that can be influenced just by gigantic follower count that and these might not be really engaged followers. I mean, you'll see that by, if you look at Rachel Miller, you mentioned her before,
Yep.
she doesn't have a gigantic number of followers, but the followers that she has engage with her like crazy. I bet if you looked at her Twitter analytics, you'd see double-digit engagement numbers, whereas most people are thrilled to pieces if they have 3% engagement on a tweet.
Yep.
It's sort of a viral factor. Are the people that you're talking to listening to you? Are they sharing the information that you have? So you have to take that into account. It can make it all very complicated. It all boils down to the ROI in the end, and there are so many different factors involved. I think certainly the influencers are a big one. Like, are you connected to people who are relevant? I mean, it's great to be connected to your customers, but that can be a little bit hard to measure other than in sales. But it's great to find people who are going to amplify your message,
Yeah.
who care about what you're saying, or are going to engage with it, share it, modify it, tell people. I've had discussions where people have asked, what about this thing, or what about that, and I'll say, oh, I know this person is the real expert in that field. Let's bring them into this discussion.
Yeah.
And that's the position you want to be in. You want to be that person that people turn to when they need help about the particular thing that you're an expert in, which ideally would involve the company that you work for and the product or service that you're selling.
Okay. So we've got a question from Bob here. What do you think about the practice of vendors trying to connect with you while simultaneously hounding you with their sales pitch?
Yes, this
Sorry,
is
Bob, I'll stop doing that now, okay?
hint received. Now, yeah, this feels like when you connect with somebody on Twitter and you get the automatic direct message on Connect, or on LinkedIn, you automatically get the sales pitch the second you connected to them. I know a lot of people will disconnect from people immediately for that. I tend to delete those messages and not ban them, but it's such a bad practice. I think it sets things off on such the wrong footing.
Yeah.
Really, if you take it back, if you just always try to imagine the social media interaction in analogies for real life. Imagining social media isn't real life, but if you just met somebody, if you right away jumped into the "Will you marry me?" or "Will you buy my product?" thing, people will flee from you. You have to build a relationship first before you consider partnerships or sales or things like that.
Yeah, you have to build that relationship. You have to work on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I'd completely agree with that, and I think we've all had the over automation approach, which a lot of people seem to be doing, particularly on Twitter, it seems, where it's thank you for connecting. Here's my LinkedIn profile. Here's my latest ebook. Here's my latest whatever it happens to be, and it's not 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 a nice approach, and it does switch you off rather than making you click the link. I guess there must be some
Oh.
click-throughs there, because otherwise they wouldn't do it.
I guess so, and I think maybe years ago someone wrote in a book that this was a good idea. So
Yes, which I can imagine. It was different, a little bit different to begin with, so it would have been novel rather than necessarily a good idea. Uh, but I think times have moved forward, and you need to keep up with the game.
yes, absolutely.
Let's move on to question 5. Share some examples of vanity metrics. Are they useful?
Sure. The vanity metrics, like we talked about, it depends on the different platform, but certainly number of followers. And is that useful? I think followers, the number of followers, oops, sorry about that, the number of followers you have can be useful to some people because perhaps they don't view them as vanity metrics. Like, I think if you have 1 million followers, the broadcast media will regard you as someone that they should be talking to. Whether that has influence on social media itself, I think is highly questionable. In fact, some people, I think, will avoid you because they think the odds of you engaging with them are particularly slim. Um,
Yeah.
likes and favorites, I wouldn't really. put a lot of stock in likes and favorites. I think they're more useful for people's own particular uses for those things. I know personally, I have a if this then that recipe that takes all tweets that I favorite and puts them into Evernote so I can read them later. So if I favorite a tweet of yours, it does mean that I did find it interesting and I'll read it later, but I wouldn't put anything else into it other than that. So that might have a little bit of use. That might tell you that yes, you're posting things that are interesting, but those aren't metrics that I would share with the boardroom or anything like that. And I think there are a fair number of them, even ones like reach, which you mentioned earlier. While it does have some use, it needs some tweaking. It can easily be misinterpreted. If someone has 1 million followers and most of those are just people who are following back and trying to sell Twitter followers and things like that, that's not really a very useful audience to have reach with.
Yes, I think. Well, I think you've got to think about what the results are and what the goal is. And as Mick on Twitter has actually pointed out, vanity metrics can be useful. So, for example, if your goal is to go onto a number of lists, there's for top CEOs with the most followers quite often comes up, with the highest clout scores quite often comes up, etc. So there is a place for these vanity metrics, I think, because people do look at them and
Absolutely.
they do treat you differently.
Yeah.
Because you've got a high number of followers, you've got a higher clout score, whatever it happens to be. So there's definitely something in there. It's not pure vanity.
Yes.
But you can take them out of context. The goal shouldn't, for me, to be have a high clout score or to have 30,000 or 30 million followers. It should be to turn around and create the engagement so that I can turn around and refer people for business and get referrals for them because I'm in the sales arena.
Yes, and that's the key thing too, I think, is you have to be who you need to be. You might be able to become an influencer and have a very high clout score through engagement with people who are interested in knitting and sewing, and that might make you look like you're a very important person and get a lot of followers, but it might not be relevant to what you're trying to do, so it's not really terribly useful. So like you mentioned the oil client earlier, there might only be 25 or 50 important people to connect to in the oil and gas industry. So you might find somebody on Twitter or LinkedIn who doesn't have a lot of followers. Maybe their clout score is not very high, things like that, but they are connected to an absolute gold mine of connections, people who are real leaders in that industry.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. So you need to look at it more closely than just the simple high-level numbers, I think is the answer. Do your research properly, and then you can get to the correct people if you're doing that sort of influencer marketing. The recipe you mentioned for IFT to go to Evernote, could you produce a blog for us on that and put it onto your website? Because we've got a couple of people who have asked for that. So if you could do, that would be fantastic.
Sure, I'd love to. And on that topic, while I am not the most dedicated blogger, my thought process is to use my tweets and other social media posts as a way of gauging interest in subjects, finding interesting topics. I aggregate them in Evernote, and then I can push them through the pipeline to blog posts, and if interest would support it, to make ebooks and things like that. So I'm trying to use the metrics and the engagement to guide what content I'm creating.
Excellent. I have to say I don't use that technique, but I do use Evernote's button on top of my browser, which I'll quite often push interesting blog articles, particularly if it's got statistics and I want to refer to those later on in one of the things I'll be writing. Then I'll turn around and push that into Evernote, and I've got a section which is purely on statistics, so that I can go through and put them all together, because I like the numbers basically. So that's always good for me.
You're a good person to be talking to me then.
Excellent. Okay, question number 6. There are a lot of websites and social networks out there. How can you monitor the data from them, all of them? And how do we decide which ones to do? I mean, Google Plus, obviously, they've just come out and decided, actually, we're going to split this up. You're going to have your social stream and your file sharing and photo sharing, etc. And all those people who are advocating Google Plus are now going, oh, thank you for wasting 3 years of my life.
Yes, it's pretty amazing. Um, but yeah, you have to figure out what social networks are important, and that can be tricky. I mean, you can make assumptions, but you never really know. So you've got to be pretty vigilant and looking around regularly to see where discussions about your industry, your product, service, and company are, and you might be surprised. Um, I think there are some networks that we get comfortable on, and those are the ones that we tend to look at the most. Like I think
Absolutely.
a lot of the people who are in this discussion, we're all very comfortable with Twitter. We love it. Some of us don't love LinkedIn that much, but if you really look into it, you'd see a lot of activity is happening on LinkedIn. And then even there are, like you mentioned, Google Plus. I mean, a lot of people dismiss Google Plus, and perhaps even more so now that it appears to have one foot in the coffin. But for particular topics, particular subjects, there's a lot of discussion that goes on there. And even if you go beyond that to sites like Reddit and particular blogs and things, there might be discussion going on that's crucial to your business that you need to find out about.
So how do I start on that process? Now, obviously, I can turn around, and we all know Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and to some
Yes.
extent Google Plus as well. How do I decide, and there are much more, as you've rightly pointed out, than this. Where do I begin?
Well, there are probably various tools that are going to help you do this, but I think you have to make sure you're not focusing on channel-specific tools that are just going to analyze Twitter, Facebook, things like that. Um, like Nuvi, for instance, which I mentioned earlier, analyzes RSS feeds and basically searches the internet. So it's searching, hundreds of thousands of websites to not only get the analysis through the API connections to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, but it can look at other sites as well. And
Okay.
I think that's super important. I mean, if somebody, you mentioned if I blog on if this then that, why would they know that I would blog about that unless they have some way of discovering that? And there might be some really important conversation that's going on there that they need to know about. So they might find a mention of it by me on Twitter, if I'm doing a decent job of promoting that content, but perhaps I'm not, and but perhaps there's still some relevance there and engagement that's going on that they need to know about.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we'll put it onto our website for our link from our side as well, and we'll tweet about it as well, so they would know about that particular one.
Wow.
So, what's
Great.
the website for that tool? Nuvi, did you say? What's it called? What's the website?
Yeah, I think it's nuvi.com. And I know I've been talking about it a lot, and I'm not trying to make this sound like a big sales pitch, but I was really blown away by the tool. Um,
Cool.
Yeah, and the only thing that I had a problem with, frankly, was it seems to be built for larger clients,
Yeah.
maybe clients that manage multiple brands, things like that. So it's
Agencies. Yeah.
priced for that. But I have talked to them, and they are going to let me essentially pay for the service and dole it out in smaller chunks to small businesses. So in addition to the development and testing services that my company offers, we're adding an analytic element. And it's meant to be geared towards small businesses, not this sort of thing where you have to invest a tremendous amount of money and you get very highly personalized service, but something that just will give you the basics that you really need that we've pretty much been talking about. Just aggregating data from all over and generating reports that have relevant metrics and some interpretation.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I think it's a natural extension to go from the web design and the web analytics into the social analytics because it has such a huge impact. So it's a good
Oh,
area to go.
definitely. Yeah,
We have a
I'm sorry.
Sorry, we have a question from James, from our friend. He's asking, how can Twitter chats help with social selling business intelligence?
That's a great question. Well, when I was looking at my Twitter analytics yesterday, I saw that a lot of the tweets that I had done that were in Twitter chats had a lot of impressions, a lot of engagement. So you have an interested audience. You're using hashtags that people are relating to, and you're talking about topics that people are clearly interested in. So I think those are valuable. The only problem with using Twitter chats in that fashion is you can get really focused on being in the Twitter chats. You can find an audience that's very interested in what you're talking about, but they may not be consumers who are interested in buying what you're trying to sell. So for me, what I decided to do was years ago is to step away from the technology-focused groups that I found so many of my peers in web development were in, where you're discussing, how did we build this? What tools are we using? To try to get involved with my target audience more, which is marketers, strategists, people like this who need technical services.
Is that good?
Fine.
Okay. Excellent. Okay, so you've mentioned the one tool there, which I think is a great idea. I think, unfortunately, you're absolutely correct in the positioning of a lot of the good analytics products are really for agencies rather than for individual companies, unless you're the enterprise type of company. But it is good to see that they are doing that wider analysis and that you can turn around and use that. Does that enable you to build the buyer personas as well of people you're engaging with on the social media channels?
Well, there isn't something in there particularly for personas, but you can do influencers, keywords, sentiment analysis, a lot of things like that. So you could extract information from there, I think, and build personas.
Okay, cool.
An automated tool to build personas would be a very interesting project.
Yeah, you'd have to get completely into the psychology of it, and the whole data mining behind it would have to be huge. I'm sure there'd be an outcry on the amount of data you'd actually be collecting on some people. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to question 7. How do you process the data into reports? And I guess this is actually, rather than using the term reports, it's the difference between converting it from data, which of course is just a stream of collected facts effectively, into information, so it's relevant, timely, and presented in a way where you can digest it properly.
That's a great challenge, I think. There's no shortage of data, and a lot of it is accessible even for free. We mentioned Google Analytics. You can get Twitter Analytics for free. A lot of websites, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, you can get analytics from those companies. Could collect them all into gigantic spreadsheets, but the challenge is, how do you connect all those pieces, get them to relate, and actually get some insight from it, rather than just having this heap of data. So I don't think anybody has any problem with recognizing that data is important, or even in collecting the information, but it's the analysis and extracting insights. Even frankly, I found most organizations don't really know how to effectively use Google Analytics. They don't even know how to look and see, without even customizing it all, what people are looking at, what things are driving people away. I see very few companies doing A/B testing or anything like that. So I think you have to learn. You either have to find a great tool to use, or you have to just learn what sites to gather the information from, what information to really look at, and what to ignore. And some of it just requires poring over that data if you're going to be doing it yourself, to try to see what insights could be gathered, what relationships could be found between different pieces of the data.
I think that's always the issue with a lot of the analytical tools, is you almost have to know what to look for to begin looking for it, to prove that the cohort exists or disprove that it exists. And that's rather than them intelligently coming out with And this is what we know just by the data. There's always somebody who's built the cohort first rather than it being predictive.
Yes, and that's a tricky thing too with even with building personas is you can make something that will answer the questions you have, but you have to make sure that you're actually listening for the answers that you need.
Yes, absolutely. And I think to some extent, when you talk to salespeople and they're talking about the way their customers interact and engage with them on a live face-to-face basis, that often translates into the digital world as well. It's not too dissimilar, although salespeople obviously have their own perceptions of how they're believed and treated, etc., as well, like anybody does. But the whole transference, I think you can do, so it gives you a starting point of being able to look into these aspects and prove or disprove the data and how you think it works.
Yes, and don't go in with assumptions. Try to be as objective as possible to to be taught, to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is analysis strategy required, and if so, how do you develop one?
I'd say an analysis strategy is definitely required. If you don't have a plan for taking data and using it to set your path ahead, you're just going based on assumptions, and that can be a very dangerous way to go. It sort of all points back to the "if you build it, they will come" idea that some people have. And as I like to say, I think there are cemeteries filled with tombstones of entrepreneurs that say, "if you build it, they will come." You really have to listen constantly, and listening on social media is done not just through listening to individual people answering your questions or saying things, but through data. That data is really aching to talk to you, and you just have to collect it and analyze it in a proper way.
Yeah.
So without that, you're just guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is probably where CMOs in particular are ahead of the game. I mean, if you look at Eric Quanstom, our CMO, he's fantastic at that, the whole data analysis element, and that's one of his core strengths, I think, that he brings to the pipeliner table, as well as his other marketing elements. But the fact he can take the data, look at it, understand it, and then relate it back to the rest of the business team so that they understand it as well is a core thing that he does. And I think I find that terribly interesting, because marketers were always to some extent to do with data, but now they've really become almost data scientists in the way they actually turn around and approach their work.
Yes, definitely. And it's challenging. It's requiring a lot of people to step outside of their comfort zone, and that's understandable. Data analysis is not always something that goes hand in hand with marketing or the skill sets that you see. I mean, you don't often see them overlapping. So I think you have to find a way to get at that data and that analysis to serve your needs and to verify what you're doing. Most likely your assumptions do have some basis in reality, but you need the head nodding of the data analysis to
make it a data item rather than an emotional item, so you can prove this is what's happening and taking place. Oh, absolutely. I think it's interesting though, if you turn around and say analysis and analytics, it sounds scientific even, and difficult to do. Where if you turn around to me and say, what are your KPIs, your key performance indicators? It's the same thing. It's just a slightly different twist on it.
Yes, that's very interesting. And I think you don't necessarily know when you're starting out what those indicators will be, what data you need to be looking at. So, there is something to be said for just developing those personas, going by assumptions, going out and just putting content out there, engaging with people, and seeing what happens. And you'll get insight from that too.
Absolutely, yeah. So if a salesperson, as an individual, because obviously not all organizations are up to speed with either analytics or social. So if I am Richard Young, I'm new to social, I want to start out in the social world, what analytics should I do to begin with? What are my baby steps to get up and running? And what should I then monitor ongoing?
Well, ideally, I think it would be nice to monitor everything. So you'd be able to pull in analytics from all the sites that have APIs and do searches across them. But if you can just search around and find influencers, read their feeds, see where they're going and what they're saying and what communities they're in, and join together with them, follow them, listen to them, engage with them, just build up from there an idea of where you should be, what words people are using, what topics people care about, and shape your message around that. You'd be surprised, you might think that you have a particular element of your offering that people really want, but it might be something a lot simpler than that.
Yes.
It's particularly if you're starting out and you don't have support from the organization, you're having to do basically everything yourself. Listen a lot, figure out where people are, who you have to listen to, what they're talking about, and develop a strategy for tracking that and for really focusing on what people need from you, not necessarily what you want to say.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. I think the problem is if you rush in, which salespeople are known to do on occasions, to rush into these things, then you can waste a lot of time and energy, which is misdirected. So I think, of course, doing that homework, as you say, work out what your audience is looking for. Work out, well, I guess it goes back to the marketing and the buying persona. Who's your target audience? Then you can start looking at what do they want to look at, what do they want to hear, what keywords should you use, where do they live? And that would be the beginning parts, I think.
Yes, and I think in some ways it's almost like when the human genome was being analyzed. For the first several years, only 1% of it was mapped, and in the last years there was exponential growth, and this was completely on schedule. And I think as a salesperson in a social selling environment, you should expect similar things. You can't pick up the phone day one and start cold calling and expect results. You've got to know who your customers are, know what they want, establish yourself as someone to be listened to and someone who's not going to just sell like crazy at people. And people will know who you are and they'll be receptive to what you say, because what you say will be relevant to them.
Yes. Absolutely. I think that's critical moving forward. So we've got 5 minutes to wrap up. So are there any things you'd like to go over again from an analytical point of view and the whole social media aspects, and recap so that we have a nice concise version of the 9 questions we've been through?
Well, I guess to summarize, I would say definitely focus on using that data and those analytics. That will be your guiding light to follow. So that you know who to talk to, what topics to talk about, and how people are reacting to your content. You don't have to be an expert in all these things, but make sure you're not just getting a limited perspective on it all, that you're getting as much as possible a really holistic view of where everyone is and what they're discussing about you and your company and the key words that are relevant to what you're trying to convey.
So keywords is an interesting one that you've mentioned there. Now, Google obviously do their PPC, their pay-per-click, and you can use them to research keywords from Google Keywords. Is there any other ways for working out what keywords I should be using? So if I'm Richard Young, I'm turning around, I'm in the sales industry, I want to engage with B2B salespeople, etc. I'm not that technical, because most salespeople are not that technical. How do I find out what hashtags I should use on, let's just say, Twitter, for example? How would I go about doing that?
Well, you can use a tool like Nuvia, which I mentioned, does keyword analysis. There are a bunch of other tools that do some keyword analysis as well, particularly channel specific. So if you're on Twitter, they'll be able to help you with that. And I think just finding those communities and search for terms and see what other terms are used, and even just when you see things, put in those hashtags and see what the results are, so that you can get some idea of how people are describing what you're trying to talk about. Because I listened to a podcast recently where someone was who was British had made a website that was about mixing drinks, and he used particular terms that were relevant in the UK but were not relevant in the US. I think it's a similar sort of circumstance, which we may know how to convey the message that we want, but it may not be in the language that people are looking for.
Absolutely, yeah. Of course, England and the US, two countries separated by a common language.
Yes.
No, I think that's very true. I think probably what I would say is if you're looking for how to get started, then the easiest way is to try and find some influencers in your marketplace and find out how they're approaching it, because that will give you a ready community to tap into. And I think
Yes.
particularly if you're talking about Twitter, there are so many great Twitter chats about which will give you fantastic advice, and most of them are filled with friendly people who will engage with you as well, which is easy to get you started and up and running.
Yes, and that can lead to other things. I've made a lot of connections on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and elsewhere through people I've connected with on Twitter. So I think it's a good place to start out.
Yes, absolutely. And I have to say, Bob, I'll give a shout out to Bob. Recently, in fact, today introduced me to a chap who's based out of Europe who we may be looking to do some work together with. So it does work. And if you talk to people in referral marketing terms, particularly salespeople, they understand referral sales. So therefore, it kind of works. I think almost the problem with social is the approach of selling social to salespeople has failed in its infancy, effectively, and they still struggle to articulate what it means and how it can be used in a coherent sales strategy.
Yes.
To be able to make it work.
Yeah, I don't think social always finds itself in the same place on that funnel that's so often talked about. I think that the funnel turns into more of a colander because there are different points into it, and it depends on how much research people have done before they come to you. So I think that breaks some of the traditional sales models. It makes it tricky.
I don't think anybody saw that the sales funnel was a funnel which all implies gravity. The metaphor doesn't work in lots and lots of different ways. And I think it's been the same case for a long time, that whether social existed or not, that people would enter that sales funnel in different steps anyway. So if I've been through this process before, let's say it's a business to business, I'm looking for an ERP system because I've bought one before, I am more educated anyway going into the marketplace, so therefore I will approach it and effectively come in later on. The only thing that's happened is the digital world has made that knowledge much more readily available to everybody rather than being elitist in its approach.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's a great leveler.
Yeah, indeed.
Fantastic. Well, we're just about at the end of our hangout, so thank you very much, Josh. I can hear your kids in the background.
Yes.
Daddy's important, He's got to spend time with kids. It's.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
It was my pleasure. We're going to finish just slightly early, but it's been a fantastic session. I would like to say thank you, Josh. You have been a fantastic expert, and thank you very much for coming on and talking about the analytics of social media.
Well, thank you very much. All right, I'll talk to you all soon.
Cheers.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye.